Welcome to Religion Unmuted, where we explore what religion sounds like with women's voices turned up. I'm your host, Pamela Prickett. Today, I'm joined by three guests: Sister Norma Pimentel, Executive Director of Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley; Ann Snyder, Editor-in-Chief of Comment Magazine; and Reverend Dr. Miguel de la Torre, who is a professor at the Iliff School of Theology. We're here to talk about immigration, religion, and gender. But first, let me give our listeners a little bit of the backstory to how this conversation came to be, because this is a panel a long time in the making. We were supposed to have this in front of a live audience at Rice University in Houston, Texas in March 2020. But, for obvious reasons, COVID, we had to postpone. And we hoped at that time, maybe naively, that we might be able to resume in person this year. But alas, here we are, meeting virtually. And I want to thank all three of you for sticking with us. Like our listeners, I know you have faced added stresses and burdens this year, and I'm just so grateful that you're joining me today and that each of you also took time to visit with Religion Unmuted earlier in one-on-one interviews. Thank you, Sister Norma, Ann, and Miguel. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Our pleasure.
You're welcome.
Glad to be here.
Let's start by getting a pulse on where each of you are in this moment when it comes to immigration. Sister Norma, I'd like to start with you. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling in the moment I need to be very hopeful because of course, the new administration here in the United States offers the possibility of the families to begin to experience change and an opportunity to possibly enter the United States and be heard, be given a chance to go through a process that is just, and that's my hope. But at the same time, I see the families and I see that they're anxious and they're worried, and that with the unknown, without what really will happen. And so this is where I'm at this point.
And as a journalist based in Washington, D.C., what are you thinking or feeling right now?
Thank you for the question. So I feel a sense of great hope, but I also feel like my feet are planted on top of a minefield that has not gone away at all, of our divisions, and in some ways planted in the minefield. There are moments it feels like a ticking time bomb of just the complexity of all of us navigating our families, our communities, in the current state of just huge, I would say, epistemological crisis, like a totally different realities that people are experiencing and seeing. I'm sure we'll get more specifically into immigration, and I think these two are far more experts than I am, but I do feel sort of a cautious hope that this administration is going to provide a pathway for reform that is going to approximate something a lot more just, something a lot clearer and less complicated, and might even be able to do so with the, whether begrudging or maybe disarmed support of those who have historically been kind of suspicious of any kind of sense of opening border, openness. So I'm hopeful about that, but it is a cautious hope.
Yeah, we're going to talk about these various realities, these multiple realities in a little bit. Miguel, how about you? What feeling is rising to the surface for you in this moment?
Well, I appreciate the comments of the other two panelists, one expressing hope and the second one expressing cautious hope. Unfortunately, I think I'm the downer. I have hopelessness. I am keenly aware of the struggle ahead, especially when we consider how entrenched white supremacy continues to be in this country. And while, my desire is for some of this legislation of citizenship to occur, at the same time, I do not want to underestimate the depths of hatred that exists in this country for people of darker skins. Now, just because I'm hopeless doesn't mean I don't do anything. Quite the contrary. The hopelessness is what propels me towards praxis, towards action. So I will work, and I hope the people listening to this will also work in spite of what is going on around us to prove myself wrong and actually pass some legislation that might lead us to maybe a little more justice as a society.
Thank you for that. I'm actually relieved that you bring up hopelessness, Miguel. I mean, like you, I think I'm seeing more problems right now than solutions. And if we're going to begin to tackle those problems, I wonder if part of the issue is in coming to accept that these problems even exist. And in dealing with what Anne called our different realities, right? Which is, I think, another way of talking about truth and our multiple truths. Sister Norma, as someone who's approached by reporters all the time, I'm curious to hear from you as to the truth that you try to get out. I mean, what would be a story that you can think of a family that you wish people knew about?
I have so many stories. I just tell you the most recent one just today. There's this young father. He must be in his 20s. He has a little girl she's 5 years old, and the wife is pregnant while he has been waiting at the refugee camp. And so she's about 7 months pregnant now. And we were walking, because he walks me all the way when I'm leaving the camp, and he walks with me. And he looks down and he looks where he said, last year when I arrived here, I was standing right there. I arrived with my family, and I was looking toward the United States, right on the Mexican side of the border. And I was looking up, and I was looking at this powerful nation in front of me. And I was asking myself, what am I going to do now? Here's this dad telling me that he felt the whole world collapsing on him, and he not know, what am I going to do now? How do I take care of my wife and my little girl, And how do I give them a place where they can be safe from the environment? Because I don't have the money to protect them in any way, or provide them with food, or give them the space where they can be safe. And what's next now? It's sort of like a moment in time that you just are faced with a reality and asking yourself, what's next? What can I do? And so this fear, and this father with such a big responsibility to take care of his family finds himself all alone, in a world that is simply saying, you're not important to us. And so that's really hard to believe, that we can turn our backs to humanity and to leave this father all alone with all those fears.
Absolutely. Miguel, I'm sure you've heard stories like this as well in your research and filmmaking at the Arizona border.
Yeah, I have. I find it interesting that you're asking the same question that Pontius Pilate asked of Jesus, what is truth? And for me, what I find interesting is the what liberation theologians call the epistemological privilege of the oppressed. And that's a fancy term that basically just says that in the matrix of truths, in the matrix of fake news, and the matrix of alternative facts, that it is the stories of the oppressed, it is the story of the marginalized, of the disenfranchised, that are closer to truth than anyone else's. So the story of the father that Sister Norma just shared with us, it's closer to truth than the theses written by theologians and experts. So the question then becomes that if we're trying to find out what truth is, whatever that may be, and we may never achieve it, we get closest to it when we listen to the voices of those who have been disenfranchised.
I just wanted to say amen to what Miguel just said. And for some, and I think this is very much a journey I continue to be on in ever more real ways, sort of, I guess, a life of many conversions every few years or every day. But somehow this phrase has woken me up every morning, and the suffering will lead us. It almost sounds biblical, but it's not quite, but I think it is biblical in its motif. Or the long suffering will lead us. And I was speaking to a mentor of mine, and he said something interesting. He said, you cannot conquer what you haven't suffered. And I don't know, there's something, and I'm quite reticent around any kind of win-lose terminology. I don't like language of conquer. I hate culture war. I hate all of that as someone who's somewhat, kind of watches this stuff go down, especially vis-a-vis religion and the nation and people of faith and the culture. But there was something about that just struck me as very true, thinking about how will truth prevail in this time? What are the lessons from the margins that need to really drive the compass of the center? So I'm speaking kind of more in epithets here than concreteness, but I just really want to affirm what Miguel just said.
Miguel, building off what Anne just said about suffering, I want to return to a term you mentioned earlier, white supremacy. We hear the term a lot. I mean, I certainly do as an academic or when I'm on Twitter, but I think I'm also starting to hear it a lot more in everyday discourse. I mean, can you link our discussions together for our listeners and talk about how white supremacy comes into this conversation on suffering and then more generally the way we think about immigration in the U.S.?
Of course. And let me begin answering that question by going back to a previous question you asked Sister Norma about why they want to come to the United States. And I think one of the reasons that we sometimes miss is that when this country, based on a manifest destiny that privileges white people, entered into other countries south of the borders in order to steal their raw materials and their cheap labor, we should not be surprised that those people are taking those same roads they built, following everything that has been stolen from them. As a person who was undocumented for the early part of my life, the only reason I'm in this country is I'm following what has been stolen from my country through a century of gunboat diplomacy and establishing banana republics. So these actions, this foreign policy was based on white supremacy, that God somehow privileges the inhabitants of this particular country. So we should not be shocked that because we've never dealt with the causes of immigration, that this is still part of the discourse that's not yet been revealed and truly dealt with. As we have seen by the rhetoric of the last 4 years, where those who are coming bring lots of problems, they bring drugs, they bring crime, some of them are rapists. I mean, with that type of racist rhetoric from the highest office in the land, only gives permission for the rest of the society to follow suit. So we really can't deal with immigration without also dealing with how deep the hatred towards Latinx folks is.
That's such an important perspective. Thank you. Sister Norma, I want to bring you in here. I mean, you run a respite center at the border. You work day in and day out with refugees. What is the America that people migrating from Central America think or hope they're coming to?
They want to come to a place where they believe will be safe. I think that is really where they think they will be protected and they'll have a chance for their children to grow up, to go to school, to be safe, to have a chance in life. I think, if anything, that's what they're looking toward the United States for that. I believe that when we give something to somebody or open our doors to help them be safe, we're doing it out of the fact that it's rightfully theirs. All of us have a right. We are not the owners of this earth. I think God equally gave us the right to administer the earth to the good of all humanity. And so when we give something to somebody that does not have, we're not giving them charity. We're giving them what's rightfully theirs. And so therefore, I think it's more than just restitution. It's something that we have a misunderstanding as to the fact that I have more doesn't mean because I deserve more. It's just that it has been distributed unevenly. And so we're administrators of the goods of this earth. And so thank God that we can give and not be in the position of needing somebody to have this sense of responsibility to others. But, as far as the people that I see at the border and the families, their face is amazing. I've seen them day in and day out come into our respite center, and the moment they see the image of Our Lady or Jesus in a statue right at the entrance, they immediately fall to the ground and into their knees and start to cry with praise to God and just thanking God for bringing them to a space where they're safe, where they're welcome. When I bring them to the chapel in my house, when there's not enough room at the respite center, and and some of them come to sleep at our hall and in the chapel, in the quiet room of the chapel, they're just crying. Man, the father's crying and saying, "Thank you, God. Gracias, Señor. Gracias, Padre." And just thanking God over and over again. It's amazing, the faith that they bring to us, that help us to reconnect with a God of mercy, a God of love.
I want to touch on that notion of love. You spoke the prayer of St. Francis in your presidential inaugural prayer service, which includes the line, "Where there is hatred, let us love." If I'm being completely honest, confessional if you will, there just appears to be so much hatred in this moment that I struggle to maintain hope, and I don't think I'm alone. So where do you draw inspiration to love when there is hatred?
One of the good things about me going to the refugee camp almost daily, I was there this morning, is when I'm able to be in the presence of a child that has nothing, that is living day after day with their parents in those terrible conditions, and that my presence there with them brings them joy when I take them a piece of chocolate or a little gift, of something. And that joy that this child opens up and rejoices fills me with great hope, gives me the force to go forward and continue to do what I do. Children give me hope because I give them, maybe with my presence, a better tomorrow. The children that will save us.
I like that notion. At the same time, Miguel, I'm thinking of the skeptical voice right now who says, and yet this is a country that caged children. And there was not a massive uprising about that. And why was there not?
And this is a country also that turns a blind eye, that every 4 days, 5 brown bodies die trying to cross the desert, creating one of the greatest human rights violations occurring in this country at this time. And I agree with Sister Norma that, and I've been at the border myself, and I've walked the trails, and I come across people, and yes, there is a faith there is a joy there, and it is satisfying to myself. But I have to also think of those who don't make it, those who die for really no reason but for greed of this country. And that doesn't make me depressed. It doesn't make me in despair. What it does is encourages me and redefines what my faith is. So I do what I do. The praxis I engage in is not because I think I'm going to win. I may not. This immigration crisis that began in the 1830s may go on for another century. So it's not an issue that I'm going to win. It's more of an issue of I do this because it defines not only my faith, but my very humanity. This is why I'm engaged in this struggle. And I'm not the savior, so it's not dependent on me. But I continue to fight for justice. And I find that, for myself, comforting.
So you mentioned something that I want to follow up on for our listeners as a clarification question to sort of help make sense of what we're talking about. Could you both, Sister Norma and Miguel, talk about prevention through deterrence and what our immigration policy is in the U.S.?
Well, my experience, because I'm at the border and I see this on a daily basis, especially since 2014, we have seen policy after policy efforts in trying to just simply implement a policy of immigration that deters people from coming, that sends that message of don't come, because if you come, this is what's going to happen to you. We will take your kids away from you. We will put you in detention facilities, and we will do this, and you will not like it. It's if you don't think this is something you want, don't come. So it's the policies are very politicized. They're almost orchestrated only for the purpose of a political gain. And so therefore it's not a policy, an immigration policy to address the humanity or the immigration reality we're facing right now. It's simply just a way to simply turn people away, and use human suffering as a means to deter. That's what I see.
Absolutely, but let me get a little bit of the history of this. Back in 1993, we passed the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and before we passed NAFTA, the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, did a report, and the report said that if NAFTA was to pass, we will have an explosion in immigration because it would destroy the Mexican rural economy. So in response to NAFTA, Bill Clinton, and let's be honest, a liberal Democrat, Bill Clinton, went to the Border Patrol and 3 months later began the deterrent policy. And as Sister Norma showed examples of, this was to make it so horrific to cross the border that people would die. But that's okay because it would deter other people from crossing the border.
Right. Yeah. I mean, an estimated 10,000 people have lost their lives trying to cross since 1994. I mean, lives lost that were avoidable deaths, right? And, I'm thinking about how some of the same people who are the architects of our immigration policies often profess to be people of faith. They say they're religious and they believe in God, and I'm struck by what some of my students, young people in the US and Europe, say they see as hypocrisy among people of faith, that they'll refer to the Bible, they'll speak the good word, but in the end, they're not willing to make sacrifices or to push for real change. And so as I'm winding this panel event down and I'm thinking about how we move forward, how we might engage religious communities on this issue, Miguel, how do you, as a theologian, encourage people to think about immigration in a new way?
So let me just quote the gospel for a moment. And on that day they will tell unto me, Lord, Lord, did we not do great things in your name? And surely I would say unto them, away from me, you evildoers, for I never knew you. And what that tells me is that people who call themselves Christians, or any other religious faith for that matter, who saying they're doing these fantastic things, God does not know who they are, because it's just words. It's a faith based on belief, as opposed of a faith whose belief is testified through actions. So when I hear stories like Sister Norma at the border every day, it is that type of faith that I want to be part of.
Sister Norma, what would you like to see people of faith who are listening do to help you?
I find that, it's interesting how you asked the previous question about Christians being fake because of the fact they don't live out their faith the way I do. I find it difficult to understand what is happening. I'm still trying to work it in my mind, in my heart. Why is it that people that I know that are friends, that are beautiful people, are thinking different the way I practice my faith? And I don't know. I don't know what's happening. I don't know. Maybe I don't see them as fake. I just see them maybe confused or disconnected to what I'm connected to. And so I'm not as quick to immediately put them in a category of people that are not connected to God, in some sense, or fake, or hypocrites, as you mentioned. But I questioned God. where are we going wrong? How come we are not connected, both of us, because they're your children as well as I am. And so somehow, where's the disconnect, and I'm a little lost on that. And I just think that we must not be quick in putting ourselves and seeing the other as the bad guy, And so I just wish that we can open our hearts to everybody, including them, so that we can find the road to Emmaus together,
That's beautiful. And you traverse multiple social worlds, right? I mean, you talk with political elites, with philanthropists, with activists, with faith leaders, as well as the writers that you work with. I mean, where do you see us finding common ground on issues of immigration and also religion? I mean, we're incredibly divided in that realm as well.
I don't see macro solutions. I don't think there are any shortcuts around personal encounter, and personal relationship. And I think a lot of creativity is required right now. I think it's very, very disturbing what has happened in the name of God, and then more specifically in the Christian sense, in the name of Christ. It's like a very twisted cross. It's just like an age-old Confederate religion rising up again in this more twisted form. And it's not only happening in the US, it's happening in sort of with toxic mixes all over the world right now, and might be getting more organized. As a person of faith, I do think there's like something spiritually dark going on, that people's sort of sense of truth and sense of calling has become so yoked with this nationalism and perpetuating this greed, and you're sort of tying vices with not even virtues, you're tying vices to a sense that God is calling you to these vices. My hope is in just those of us who are feeling in consternation and disturbed to force ourselves to, on the one hand, you can't reach out. It's like if you have a really toxic relationship in your family and it's filled with verbal abuse and it's filled with people who won't hear and don't have soft hearts. I think most psychologists would advise to give it time, silent treatment, whatever. So there is that element with certain folks who are so closed. But I think we're all probably in some relationship with those who we are whose views right now we're in such consternation around, who say it's at the level of spiritual siblingships. Somehow you can hopefully appeal to something there, not in an accusatory way, but in a deep search for truth kind of way. But it requires creativity. It actually requires, in a funny way, not smoothing over differences, but acknowledging them and naming them, and sometimes not embracing them. But I just think you have to be honest. You have to begin from a place of how honestly divided we are, but choose to somehow stay in some sort of conversation. But this happens one person by one person, one relationship by one relationship, and it takes a lot of courage and perseverance and a willingness to sort of be maybe consistently a little bit confused for a time. Not confused on moral principle or truth, but a willingness to sort of feel come to the end of oneself and very broken, but hopefully to be broken open.
I feel that we came back to the idea of hope that Sister Norma opened us with. These are difficult conversations. I think the fact that, we're struggling in this with 4 people to think of ways of finding hope, and then you look at the scale at which we have to have these conversations as a nation, and I think we're all pretty much, have the same goal of creating a more humane immigration policy. And we're struggling, right, with 4 of us. So I can imagine the obstacles that are before us as a nation. Well, thank you all for joining us today, Sister Norma and Miguel. It has been such an amazing experience. I've learned so much, and I'm so incredibly grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Religion Unmuted. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to, rate, and review us wherever you listen. The Religion and Public Life program is on Twitter at RiceRPLP. Thank you again to our guests, Dr. Miguel de la Torre, Sister Norma Pimentel, and Ann Snyder. Today's show was written by Rachel Schneider, Haley Hemstreet, and myself. Our producers are 3 Wire Creative and Daisha Clay. We had support from the Henry Luce Foundation. I'm Pamela Prickett. Until next time.